thank you, Scott, for coming on today. I really do appreciate it. For those of you who don't know, Scott is an ex-Google engineer and now works with Adafruit. I believe you work with Adafruit for your own company?
Yeah, I'm a contractor, technically. So technically I'm a freelancer, but I've only ever been paid by one person for full-time work. Yeah, so, but they're based in New York and I'm in Seattle, so that's one of the reasons that it works out that way.
Okay. So Scott has all sorts of experience in all sorts of things, and at the moment working with Adafruit doing hardware-related stuff such as CircuitPython and some of the projects that you're actually working on as fellows, which is quite exciting. So if you do have any questions about the projects you're working on or just open source, make sure to get those in the Zoom chat. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into the questions. Starting things off with, someone asks on, have you got any tips on how to brand and make yourself known in the industry, and anything extra along with that would be appreciated too?
That's a hard question. It's very different between my career is basically made up of 6 years at Google, 4 years of Adafruit, and then I had a year in the middle where I did my own thing. And I wouldn't say that I branded myself at all when I was at Google, but having Google on your resume is incredibly useful. And there are a lot of very smart people that do go to other companies, so you build your network, but to say that you build a brand, I wouldn't say that's the case. Now, with Adafruit, all my work is public and open source, and Adafruit has a lot of faces that are public figures kind of for them, for their brand. And so I think that as being part of that, part of the marketing and part of being an open source company, I think I have more of a brand now than I did. And open source is certainly a good way to do that. And being present and streaming are great ways to do that. But I don't think that's very common. I think in terms of the industry, you're going to find people who are solidly in the industry and have really good networks and resumes, but don't necessarily have a brand.
You're sort of like the odd one out, and it's worked quite well for you. But I suppose definitely having those big tech companies on your CV definitely does help get you noticed.
Yeah, and it gives you also the freedom to take bets on companies that are kind of less secure than the giants are.
Gotcha.
Right, once you have a Google or a Microsoft or an Amazon on your resume, you can be more secure and take some more risks about where you go after that.
Interesting.
So I don't think a brand is required to be successful in the industry. I think I should be explicit about that. It's nice and I enjoy it, but that's not a requirement by any means.
Interesting. That's super useful. So following on from that, we've also got someone asked, what are some of the problems that you face as a young developer that is made easier today due to more readily available access to information?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting question, because I don't think that my career, the internet's been around, right?
You're not that old.
I'm not that old, right? I work with an awesome guy, Dan Halbert, and he's literally the original author of the More command. And he went to Berkeley and worked on RISC-1 and all this stuff. He's had an email. He's the generation where you really didn't have the internet and easy access to information. But for me, I didn't I had access to computers prior to the internet, but I didn't really get into programming until I was 13, which would have been 1999. And we had dial-up for a while, and then we also got cable. And cable was the time where you could actually download a Linux ISO and install Linux, and discovered that there's more to the computer world than just the Windows desktop. So I don't think I don't think that was the case.
Well, fun fact, you started programming when I was born. So
I've totally pulled that on other people, and yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of the fellows are the similar age to me. So
yeah, that just blows my mind.
It's never too early to get started.
No, it's not. But definitely, I don't know if I would have started earlier had I had access to the internet better, because I did have it before that. I think there is also an element of like your brain being ready to take on engineering tasks and projects and things. So yeah, I was definitely on the cusp of that transition of like most of the learning I did for programming was actually done by like learning on a website. Like I started with a book, but I very quickly moved from the book to a website that had great tutorials and stuff.
I can't say that I've really used books to learn how to program.
Yeah, I believe that.
I had a Python book, but the internet's just easier to find.
And they get out of
things.
date. Like I had a friend who was writing a MicroPython book, and I was just like, why are you doing this? Like he was including code for CircuitPython in there where I'm like, wait, I haven't even committed it yet, and now you're going to put it in a book. Like that's crazy to me. Like I think that, you know, books have their place for general concepts and broader, like there is a lot of history. There's a lot of reasons why things are done the way they are now that have origins in like even the 70s and the 80s that books can still give you that. But in terms of details and syntax and code, like those are not worth looking at.
Cool. So two books that I've read two programming books. The first one, which I think that Scott might agree with, is there is a book that's like called the C programming language book that's just like really good for just kind of smashing all those fundamentals in C. If you've heard of it, you know what I'm talking about. It's like the book for C.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, but I've not read it.
We got encouraged to like read it for our C course last year, but no, it's pretty good. And another one I read was a Haskell book, which explains the basics pretty well and stuff like I can't even remember what I was going to say, monads and stuff like that. It did all of that kind of stuff quite nicely. But yeah, for the most part, programming books, they get outdated quite quickly. So
I do.
Unless you're planning to buy it brand new and read it really quickly, by the time it's published, it will probably also be out of date in some way or form.
Right.
Cool. So following on from that, we've got a question asking about recommendations that you could give a junior developer about what kind of tools/skills they must have up their sleeve to make a name for themselves in today's rapidly changing technological environment. It's quite a mouthful.
I think it's interesting that it's also like make a name for yourself. Again, it kind of goes back to the branding thing. And I think for the large part of the industry, that's not a thing. Like maybe if you're looking at the Mark Zuckerbergs or whoever the newer founders are, like if that's what you're going for, I can't help you. Like my opinion is that's just a lot of luck. And it's not skill that put those people in those positions. It's just, they were first and they had this idea that people liked, which is all luck. I don't think, certainly there's hard work involved, but a lot of people work hard and only a few people end up with that sort of success. So I don't think making a name for yourself is something you should come into this industry expecting. And I also would caution against thinking that there's any one skill or any one tool that is essential to do that. I think what's more common that I see in junior developers, they're dumping a dumpster. What's more common to me is I see people focus on the differences between things. And I think more senior engineers will actually invert that and see the common things instead. So if you learn Python, like you can think of like, I can only program Python, but that's not actually true, right? There's like a ton of languages that share a lot of the language with Python, a lot of the concepts like if statements, for loops, which I'm still astounded that I get paid to write every day, right? Like those things are the commonalities and those are the fundamentals that I think you should ground yourself in. And I think that thinking about tools as different hinders that like cross concept sort of thinking that you'll find in more senior folks. So I would encourage you to get to that point, like experience Haskell, experience all these things and experience the difference between managing your memory in C versus not in Python and that sort of thing. But don't get so holed up in one technology or tool, but rather think of the long term and see how things are the same across tools and things.
I suppose like something from my personal experience is you may get hired to do a job for your skill set. Like I got hired at Arm last year to go write a bunch of drivers in Python, but then they went, can you now do this other thing and completely unrelated in Groovy? And I didn't know any Groovy, but because I already knew fundamentals, I was able to kind of pick up the concepts and kind of work my way around this after a few days of banging my head against the wall. You know, it's they wanted me for my problem solving, not the fact that I knew a language inside and out.
Right, and your ability to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's super important. And I think the other thing that's not said enough is actually the non-technical skills, right? Like learning to work in a team, learning to, this is actually something Dan pointed out to me as he and I started working together, of like really working towards a model where you don't associate your self-worth with the code that you produce can be really helpful when you're working in a team. There are some people who are really brilliant programmers, but they tie their ego up in the code they produce, which causes conflict when when they're put in a situation where their code is critiqued because they take it personally. Dan pointed out to me that this is some 1970s paper or 80s paper, I think it's 70s, talks about like different archetypes for programmers. And they talk about the notion of the egoless programmer, the person who can like disassociate their self-worth from their code, and being able to take criticism and learn from how to make your code better while not having it impact you personally is one of the things that folks should learn over time. And that can be pretty hard because there can be kind of communities within programming where they value the like what I call the brilliant jerk. And it's there's a book called The Tech Manager's Path, and they talk about this archetype of the brilliant jerk, which is the person that nobody likes to work with, but they produce really good code and they can do it quickly and efficiently and blah, blah, blah. But like the reality is that their code's not usually maintainable and nobody wants to work with them. So like it's not actually valuable over the long term. And it's actually important to get rid of those people in your team because they're not team players. So I think there's a lot of social skills around technology that you, again, like tech industry is very tech oriented and tool oriented, and sometimes that is lost. So I'd encourage folks to think about the way that they interact with others, the assumptions they make about the other people they're working with, and how they feel when they receive feedback on their code.
I can definitely think of a few people who are very, their code and their selves are very tied together. Mm-hmm. It's like a bad habit to get into, I suppose. You want to keep that separation.
Right. And it's also, and you as a reviewer can also do a lot to help that, right? Like you can phrase your feedback in a way that does attack the person, or you can phrase it in a way where it deliberately says this code, that code, right? Rather than like, you chose to do this, you chose to do that. That's something to be aware of as a reviewer as well, because you can reinforce or not reinforce those sorts of habits.
There you go. Top tip for the fellows who are currently reviewing your peers' code.
Yeah, take time to think about the way that you give the feedback and receive the feedback.
I suppose give feedback that don't give feedback that you wouldn't want to receive. Words can be a wonderful thing that done badly can create, especially also talking to someone in person, which is a bit difficult at the moment. You can have a lot more people can understand your tone and they can understand what you're trying to say much easier. From like how I do hand gestures when I'm talking, which you can't see. What a shame. But via text, Joe and Ash actually said this yesterday. Via text, this person always seems super angry and always annoyed. And in person, they're the most lovely person ever. It's just they just don't show any of that. You can't see the emotion through text. So you got to just think about that when you're doing your reviews, because you won't necessarily, if you're really happy with something, they may not see that.
Right. And I think it's important to recognize that even if you're working remotely, you can upgrade kind of your communication bandwidth, right? Like if you're communicating with somebody over text, over like GitHub issues or something, and you're having problems, like ask them to do a voice call or a video call, and you're much more likely to like sort that all out if you have this like higher bandwidth sort of communication. Like I did that just earlier today where Jeff, another guy I work with, said like, hey, like I have these things that I feel like I'm blocked on. What do you think? I need some guidance. And it was like, can we just talk about it and it will be quicker and like it's more efficient. So we did that and it worked out well. And I think even though you can't talk to people in person, you should remember that there is always that path to upgrade to at least a video call.
I do this with the full-time MLHs. Swift and I will just be talking in DMs and he's not quite understanding what I'm saying. So the next thing I know is there's a Zoom link in the chat and
right.
It's all solved in like 5 minutes, right? Because it's just so much easier to get words across.
Right. It's also important though, if there's somebody who's perpetually coming across as frustrated or mean, and you know they don't intend it, like that is a skill that they should work on, right? Like, and that's something you can give them feedback on is their word choice and how they phrase things. It's not something like it's taken me at least 10 years to figure that out. But it's, you know, the words you use are deliberate and you have to own those. You have to own the way that people interpret your words, not just the intentions behind your words. Because people don't know the intentions behind their words. They just know what you wrote. And as somebody who moderates a Discord, like that's something you have to highlight to people sometimes of like, I don't care what your intentions were. The thing that you conveyed to us with the words you chose to write was what did not match your intentions, and that's on you.
People just won't even realize. So feedback is definitely very, very important here.
Right. And be kind, especially if you're giving that feedback, because some people are not used to getting it. Yeah, it's tough.
Got someone like that in my pod, says someone in the chat.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something you're going to see your whole career, and the quality of the company that you're at and the manager you're under is going to be like their response is going to reflect their quality. Like it's something we all have to learn and deal with and try to be better ourselves. But some environments will be better at handling those issues than others.
Cool. I think that's definitely, hopefully that's some good advice for the person who asked that question. Slightly less serious career talks now. A bit more fun. It's all good. It's all good. I'm sure everyone's finding this really helpful. So someone asked, recently, I think it was in April, Raspberry Pi announced a new HQ camera where you can put lenses and stuff on it. You can get the sensor for about £50. I'm sorry, I'm going to refer to everything in pounds. I know that none of you are British, but you're going to have to deal with it. It's about $50. And the lens, there's 2 different lenses you can get, like standard, and they cost between like $30 and $50. Scott, what do you think of it? It's a bit different to the old Raspberry Pi camera or the standard one.
I don't really do any Raspberry Pi, so I mean, it's cool, but I honestly don't have any idea.
There you go.
I work on smaller things. Like all the stuff I do is like things that can't run Linux or could barely run Linux.
So, an Arduino kind of guy.
Yeah, like Arduino class. Yeah. It's much simpler. It's way better. In my opinion, it's way better to be working without Linux. It's a lot less complexity.
Cool. Following on with the less serious trend, someone asks, where do you see drone development going?
So this might be referring to the fact that I spent like a year doing my own flight controller development stuff. And I have to have a pretty similar answer that I haven't actually done drones really for the last 4 years. So my information is out of date. When I kind of stopped doing drone stuff, it was for 2 reasons. One was that the market was basically DJI. Like the market had this tiny racing section, which was cool, but there wasn't a lot of money there. And there was already a lot of companies from China making cool stuff at a good price. And so there wasn't a lot of room there for my stuff. And then on top of that, the community wasn't really community that the FPV racing community wasn't really one that I wanted to be a part of in the long term, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is like it's more an issue of the people than the actual tech. So I don't really know to answer the actual question. I don't know where it's going because I haven't been following it.
Fair enough. Going back to career related stuff, so you worked at Google for, did you say 6 years?
Almost 6 years. Yeah, I was like a month shy of 6 complete years. Yeah.
Pretty impressive stuff. So what did you find that challenged you as an engineer at Google?
I think I was thinking about this because I saw the question. I think the answer is scale, and that's scale in a lot of different ways. It's the scale at which I could tell somebody that I worked on Google Maps and they knew what it was and had an opinion of it. Usually the thing they asked me after that was whether I drove the Street View car, which I did not. And then the second thing after that, they would tell me a time that it did them wrong. Usually was the response as well. So that was pretty interesting to work on something that everybody knew. It was also interesting to work in a code base. Like Google's code is largely all in one central repository, which is pretty wild given that they have like millions and millions of lines of code in there. And like I could be running our service that I worked on a computer that was also running Gmail, for example. And the idea that there's like buildings around the world full of computers that are running this stuff. And it's just, the scale is incredible. And the number of people working on it, it's just mind boggling. You're only going to get that at a large tech company of just so many people working on something that's used by so many people. And how do you get things done while not breaking it at the same time?
That's pretty interesting. How many people were roughly working on Google Maps?
It was kind of weird because I was in a remote office. So I was up in Seattle here. And so when I started, the team was like 24 people. So that was like 2009. And then by the time I left, it was maybe 150 people just up here. But then I would go visit Mountain View and start to chat with a few of the people that I worked with down there. And they would be sitting in a building full of people working on Google Maps. Wow. And that was just the engineering side. Now there's all like data people and all this sort of stuff. So it's a lot, it's, hundreds or a few thousand who work on it. And
damn. But I suppose Google Maps is on like pretty much everyone's phone and most people use it. So it's important that it doesn't break, I suppose.
Yeah. And it's very hard to do very different things when people know what to expect and what works now to continue to work as well.
You'll see it quite often on social media when some company will change the way something looks or the way something functions, and you'll get like half the people love it and they're like, yes, this is such a good change. And then some people who are normally less into, like, they don't care that much, they just want it to work, they're like, this thing that I know how it works doesn't work anymore, like I don't know where anything is. And normally there are people who don't spend the time to learn things, they just want, they want that thing to work and then they don't want to think about it again. Whereas we're probably a little bit more nerdy and find that kind of stuff a bit more cool, so we'll spend the time to learn how the new update, but
be more resilient.
Exactly. But
and I think industry, like, you can also, well, in any company you can get in this mode of thinking that shipping features is valuable, when in fact, like, it's not the fact that you shipped a feature, but what the feature actually does that creates value. And I think that's where you end up getting things that aren't valuable released. It's that, like, you lost that connection between what was valuable and just the act of creating a feature. It'd be really hard.
David Lord from the Palettes project actually said something about this the other day. It's like people will put requests in for adding new features, and he's like, you got to think about it in the fact that feature may be a little thing, but now every time you add a new thing, you got to make sure it's compatible with said feature. And it's like, is that feature actually worth adding to the whole thing, or is that just an extension that people add into their own code? Like, is it worth the time and effort to make this thing maintainable? And normally it's not. It's normally one person wants it on their one project when they could just build it themselves. It doesn't need to be built into the core library. The cost is not the upfront cost of adding it, it's the long tail cost of having it around forever. Or at least until you deprecate it.
That has a separate cost.
So, following on with the Google Maps questions, what was your favorite thing that you did working on Google Maps?
What was my favorite thing?
Maybe a better question, like a starting question would be, what did you actually do on Google Maps?
So, when I first joined Google, I joined the team that was the road traffic team, which was the team that ingested data from a variety of sources and decided to like what color to color the roads based on whether there was traffic or not. And it actually had the team mailing list was road traffic team because there was already a traffic team, but that was the network traffic team, not the road traffic. So so I joined that team, but my first task was to improve the way that the colored lines were put on the map. So this was a time where Google Maps was still just PNG images that was loaded in JavaScript on the browser, and you could move that around. And so the way it worked when I started was that you splatted the colored lines on top of the base map, and that would mean that you wouldn't be able to read the road labels. And they had just switched to a system where the PNGs were more dynamic, and you could render an overlay that included the road labels. So that was kind of my first thing, and that got me into the world of actually rendering the map. And even more specifically than that, figuring out like what colors and styles to use on the map itself. So I think maybe the thing that I worked on that had the most noise was like I did the implementation of the rendering of the map for bicycle directions. And that was still within like the first year that I was there. There is this phenomenon of like when you get to some place, you have basically no responsibility because you're so new. And so I was able to get a lot done, but then like suddenly I knew everything and people needed to talk to me, and the impact you have and the way that you work changes a lot once you're to that point. So that was definitely one of the bigger public things. And then the last thing I did kind of before I left was I worked on changing the system that we use to define what the map looked like. So it's the equivalent of like CSS, like how CSS works for an HTML page, but for map data. So like, is it a highway? Is it a pond? Is it a one-way road? That sort of thing.
So what would you say that your favorite part of all of that was?
I mean, I love maps, and the impact that we could have on people, or already were having on people, of getting people everywhere. And I also remember my boss, when I started, showed me the prototype for turn-by-turn navigation, which was secret when I started, and they released it like that fall. And if I look back at that now, like without free turn-by-turn navigation on your phone, like Lyft and Uber would not exist, which is pretty mind-boggling. Like commoditizing that ability is what led to those giant companies happening. So I think, having that scale of impact is interesting, and it's easy to identify value, but at the same time it's hard because like if I got into the weeds of what I actually worked on, or like how I subtly changed like the text rendering from this to that, like you just blank over, because like you would never pick up on that stuff. So it's a weird mix of like everybody knows the thing I work on, but nobody knows the thing that I actually changed, which is interesting and tough, and ultimately not something I was liking anymore.
So I suppose that's how the whole taking a year out and then joining Adafruit kind of
yeah. So it was like, I told myself joining Google I would only be there 3 to 5 years, and I ended up being there almost 6. So it was definitely time for me to like take a step back. I had run the numbers to know I could afford to take some time off and experiment with my own thing, which is what I was missing at Google. Is that you have managers, you have priorities, you have responsibilities, and I just wanted to have the space to pursue crazy ideas that I have. So I did that.
So something you mentioned was that you said when you started you were going to only work for Google 3 to 5 years. What led you to make that sort of decision?
The idea of like limiting how long I'd be there.
Yeah, just like in the sense that you didn't want to kind of just stay there forever. You wanted to get a bit of variety sort of thing.
That's a good question. I guess I assumed that I would want to do something else. If you look at how like my hobbies go, I work on something for like 2 weeks and then move to something else and can like circle back to a new project. But like the reality is that a lot of the stuff I work on is like kind of spurts and stuff, and things don't get finished. So the idea that I could work even for 3 to 5 years on the same thing was kind of astounding to me. And it is much easier when you're paid to sit in an office and work on something. But at the end of the day, it's only so interesting. And I also got to the point where I had thought about the problem long enough that I had concluded the things that I would like to work on within the space, and that was not a place that I could do it. Or at least I had a few months where I was able to kind of like go off and be really exploratory. But any company that has a R&D section is not going to really want you to do that crazy stuff if you're not part of the R&D section.
Okay. So for the fellows who are sort of at this position where they could make those sort of decisions, what advice would you give them? Would you suggest that they kind of keep their options open, or?
I would certainly apply to everything that's interesting to you. And only once you have offers in hand, make that decision whether you want to do them or not. Don't discount, from the sense of like, don't discount yourself of whether you could get a job at Google or Facebook or whatever you're interested in before you apply and before you go through their interview process, right? Like, I think a lot of people count themselves out or say like, read the job description and say, oh, I don't have this or that, and then never apply. Like let those people make that decision for you. And then once you have all your options, then pick. I think for folks coming out of school, I think the big companies are a good option. They're solid, they pay well, they have good benefits, they have experienced engineers that you can learn from, they have very clear cut promotion ladders where you can understand and grow. And they're great on your resume. So like, I would not go to Google out of school. Like I would recommend those jobs if people are interested. I think if you go the route of going a smaller company or a startup, like you risk, you have a greater risk of like not getting a lot of value out of it, in the sense of like maybe not learning a lot or getting something on your resume that doesn't make sense or something that only lasts for a little while. I think that can be tough too. Like if you only go to a place for a year, it's not necessarily as strong as like if you're there for a number of years, for whatever reason. But that being said, if you don't like the work and it's a bad place, like don't stay there. Take that hit to your resume, because it's not worth it for you. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Cool. So you said about having freedom and stuff, so like kind of work on your own stuff and having that kind of freedom to kind of explore your ideas. Now, something that I know, and I know some of the fellows will know, is at Google you get like a 20% project. How does that all work? And did that give you some option to sort of experiment with stuff, or not really?
It was an avenue when I was there. It was one that you had to be very direct and take some risk to take. You had to like plan ahead, very much message people when you were going to work on it, because, you know, if somebody has a pull request waiting for you, like you're not going to be able to take Friday and ignore it unless you've done a really good job of like conveying that. So I think, and also at the end of the day, whatever you do in your 20% time, they own. So at the end of the day, it is still not up to you what happens to that project. So there's like some ideas that I explored in that space that nothing happened to. And maybe you can or can't get it to the right person within the company. And even then they've already decided what they want to work on generally. So I think it's a myth, and I don't think you should rely on that. Instead, read your contract carefully about moonlighting, meaning what you can work on your own ideas and own them outside of work, and be very diligent about making sure that that you understand how that works. Because a lot of tech companies may even try to put it in their contract, but your local laws disallow it, of like owning everything that you do outside of work. Generally, it's like it has to be off company time and not on any company equipment. So like if the only laptop you have is the one that work gave you, like you can't use that, because then they could claim that they own it. So if you want to do that, I would say moonlight with it, but be very careful how you do it and make sure that you own it, which is tricky.
Cool. Well, steering away from Google now, we're going to someone asked, what is your biggest achievement to date? So this could be Google, Adafruit, maybe something you did when you were in college.
Again, I think I don't think that should be what you're striving for, first and foremost, because I think it's a long-term thing, right? Like it's what you do cumulatively over your career, not just a single thing. That being said, I think that CircuitPython and the way that it's grown has been really good, and I've been very proud of how that project and the community has grown to be a really positive place for people to come and learn to program. And so that's definitely the thing that I'm most proud of, is that not only have we built a very easy system for programming, but we've also built a community where everyone is welcome, and we don't tolerate brilliant jerks, and we don't tolerate people who are making other people uncomfortable deliberately, or at least haven't been willing to improve themselves. So yeah, that's definitely the thing I'm most proud of. Of course, that's what I do right now, so like that's context as well. But comparing that to what I did at Google, I just don't like, even if the impact of the number of people that know about CircuitPython is drastically less than Google Maps. Like the end result is that I didn't actually have a lot to do with people knowing Google Maps. So I feel much more ownership over CircuitPython instead.
Cool. So following on from that, you mentioned about CircuitPython. Someone asked, what is next for CircuitPython? Anything big in the pipeline that you're allowed to tell us about?
Yeah, so that's the funny thing, and I know there's a question about closed source versus open source as well. I can tell you basically everything, right? Like Adafruit, the people that pay me, like they pay me for open source work. I have literally no contract with them. I just put an MIT license on the code, and they pay me to do that. So like there's really no things I can't tell you about. I just can't predict the future. Yeah. If I could, who knows what I would be doing, because that would be immensely valuable. But when it comes to our work on CircuitPython, there's kind of two tracks. One is the track of like pushing the boundaries of how easy it is for somebody to program. And that is like, what is their first 5-minute experience? This is the bucket that the glider work falls in, of like pie in the sky. Let's make it better. Let's be more accessible to more people. And that work is amazing and really fascinating, but it's also very detached from the business model that Adafruit has, who are the people that pay me, which is selling hardware. So Adafruit is really actually very, very good in the way that the way they market and design and develop hardware products, because they do it kind of focused on the projects that they think people want to be able to do that is not easy to begin with. So say you want to make a screen that tells you the temperature in your room, and they realize that like right now you have to buy these 3 things to do it, but they could make a widget that is one thing. And so they'll think from the perspective of like, how would I teach you how to make this thing? What things do I need to produce so that you'd be able to do that? And then where I come in is like, okay, what software, what features what capabilities do we need in CircuitPython in order to do that as well. And that's the work that like is much shorter term and much kind of like directly impactful to the business and the bottom line of Adafruit, who pays the bills of those of us who are paid to work on CircuitPython, which is also a tricky line to walk in the sense of like, these are not CircuitPython priorities necessarily. They're people paid by Adafruit to work on CircuitPython priorities. And there is some sort of like difference between like the way that I would steer the project and the way that I would steer like the Adafruit directed work. And they're kind enough and realize the bigger picture to like be able to work on things that are both of those things.
Okay. So a bit of context for everyone. I'm in the same sort of position as Scott, where I don't actually work for Major League Hacking. I'm a contractor, which basically means that I do work for them, but I don't know anything about the company's like internalness, and I don't know any of. I'm in the same position as you. I know a little bit of stuff to do my job, but I basically get told the things I need to do my job, and that's about it. Because I'm not an employee of the company as such.
Right.
Because I don't imagine a lot of you have done any sort of contracting work, but you might end up experimenting with it in the future.
Yeah, and it definitely varies too. Like I work directly with the owner of Adafruit, and like Limor Fried is an amazing engineer and businesswoman. And there's a lot of back and forth in terms of like what products she thinks would be important and the feedback from me on those products. So like, I definitely want to see Adafruit succeed because they're paying my bills. So I do have that, like that perspective of like, I understand why I need to work on this chipset right now because it is a low cost Wi-Fi chipset. So the ESP32S2 is this new chip and it's fast and it's cheap and it does Wi-Fi. So like a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is that, and that's simply because it is going to end up in a lot of products.
Someone's asked in the chat, how do you get started with contract work? Like, how do you apply or land a contract job? So I'm going to just quickly give you how it works at MLH. If you apply to become a coach, which is what I am, you can go to mlh.io/coaches and you can apply to be part of the coaches program. It's very similar to doing like a normal job, apart from my contract just states that I'm an independent contractor. Some of the other contracting work I've done is based on networking and me knowing people and them wanting me to do a quick bit of work for them. We have an agreement that says, you do this, we'll pay you this for this long. And for me, mostly it's been from knowing people by networking and doing stuff like this. I'm interested to hear your take on this, Scott.
That's been my experience where I literally like was doing my drone stuff and realized that I didn't want to keep doing it. And I was starting to look, and I had been going on Adafruit's Show and Tell, which is their like live stream on Wednesdays. And I straight up said, like, I'm looking for a job. and they had my email. So the next day I got an email saying like, hey, we have a project we have in mind. Are you interested? And I was like, yeah, like, sure. And it was getting MicroPython, which CircuitPython is based on, running on their hardware. And I'd done Python before and I discovered I loved embedded, so it just fit. The one thing I would caution against in terms of contracting is going through a contracting company. I don't have any direct experience from being the contractor, but at a place like Google, I did see contractors get hired that way. And I think that by going through a company like that, you could potentially get yourself in a situation where you're not getting your true value in terms of pay, because those companies, they find the work for you, but they also take a cut. And that cut, I think, can be quite significant. And contractors are also usually the first to go in terms of if a company's having problems. So just be aware of that. If that's the route that you do go, because I think there's some folks associated with MLH that are hired that way as well. So just stay frosty when you're looking for contracting work, and do your homework in terms of what the contracts are and the people that you're working for.
Definitely, yeah.
You can also get screwed in terms of pay, I think. So like you may do all the work and then have to hound people to get them to actually pay you for it. So Yeah.
Fun fact, Major League Hacking has more contractors than it has full-time employees. They've got about 12 or 13 full-time employees and about 20, 25 contractors, also known as coaches, the people you see at Major League Hacking events, because they're the ones that they need to go out to all of these events all the time, but they don't need lots of people internally doing all of the admin and logistics. So
Right.
but again, if the company started, struggling for income, we'd be the first people to go, because they wouldn't be able to support as many events, so they wouldn't need as many coaches, but they wouldn't necessarily get rid of us. They just wouldn't get us any work to do, I suppose, because they only pay us for the work we do. It's not like a regular thing.
Yeah.
Cool. So following on nicely, you briefly touched on earlier, which was, do you prefer working on open source or closed source projects?
Open source, hands down. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, and I should also say that if you have the opportunity working at a big tech company out of school, you should take it, even though it's closed source, because you're simply just going to get a really good experience doing that. Now, in the long term, I much prefer open source for a couple of reasons. One is that you can see my work. Like, you can literally go on my GitHub and see what I did yesterday. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And like I was talking about with Google, like, you couldn't actually understand the work that I did, except for the 3 sentences I could put on my resume. But with open source, you can literally see how I work, and you can work with me. You could have worked with me from the very get-go. Adafruit hires a lot of people that way as well, of like, we already work with the person, we're just going to pay them now so they have more time. So open source is definitely ideal. And then the other reason that I like open source a lot is that you build your open source projects on other tools that are available and open source. So one of the things, and one of the reasons I wouldn't stay at a big company, is that the tools you're learning are proprietary to them. And therefore you can't really, like, of course you can apply the concepts abroad, but across or outside the company. But when it comes to actually knowing the tooling that you can use when you go to the next job, like, you can't do that if you're at a closed source shop that relies at least on a lot of proprietary stuff. So also keep that in mind, what things you're comfortable using. Of course, I said earlier, tools don't really matter, but when you're spending 6 years learning a tool, you should think about whether you can bring it with you or not.
Here's the thing, right? If you go work at Google, Amazon, whatever, big tech company, insert here, for 3 to 5 years, but your career, you do that, and then you're 25, 26 when you stop doing it, like, you still have your entire career ahead of you, right? It's just kind of like gets you that really good experience, that really good background. And, people work till there's like 60, 70. So like, don't feel like just because you have that one job, you're now locked into that. If you look at a lot of the successful people, especially some of the people who've done talks, they've worked all over. And actually, John Britton, who's one of our program staff, he'll be doing a talk on this in a few weeks' time, and he's had offers from like all these different companies, but he doesn't, he's done all these different things because he hasn't just sat in the same company. And if you want to do that, that's absolutely fine. If you enjoy what you do, then there's no reason to change. But if you're getting a bit bored, a bit fed up, then there is you don't have to be locked in. There's loads of time.
And there's perspective too. I think, like, even if you like the company you're in, if it's the place you went after school, like, you should see, like, you don't really know that place is actually the best place for you until you've been to a few places. So keep that in mind.
One of the issues that I personally see with university is you feel like everything is very rushed and you have to do everything like immediately. It's all about getting a job. And then you kind of like, the end goal is getting that job after school, right? But in reality, right, life's not like that. It's like, once you have that job, it's not like, okay, I can sit back and relax now. Obviously, you're not quite like running around in the same way, but that, it's the start of the next chapter. It's not necessarily the end goal.
Right. Yeah, and don't forget about the non-work stuff either. Like, don't just focus on work, focus on your life outside of work and the things that you like that are not your work. That's important too.
I will, outside of, let's call this tech as a very generic thing. I don't really know what I call my job now. I go and do a bit of sport. and I play video games. Very, very different. Try and have a hobby or something that is very different. Definitely helps break things up.
Yeah, it gets really tough if your hobby turns into your job, as was my case.
I've got a friend who really enjoys writing projects in his spare time, but he's having the issue of like just feeling burnt out, and it's because he doesn't have that sort of separation or any sort of, he's constantly doing it. He'll go from doing work, which is writing code, and then stop to continue writing code, but he's still working, even though it may not be like work he's getting paid for. Right. So the poor dude is feeling exhausted, and it's like, take a break, go and I don't know, go for a run or something. Just do something different.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, take care of yourself first.
Cool. So we have a few quick fire questions just to kind of finish things up.
Sure.
Are you a tabs or spaces kind of guy?
Spaces.
But
set up your editor so you can see tabs and spaces.
What I do is I have my editor to do 4 spaces when I press tab, because mostly in Python, because otherwise things break.
That's what I do too.
Good. I'm glad
I don't want to see tab characters in there.
Now the next one is very editor based. Are you a light theme or a dark theme kind of person?
I think most of my stuff is now set up to change with the day, or like with time of day. But I go back and forth.
Okay.
I don't have one preference. I don't want my eyes blasted out when I look at my phone in the dark.
Yeah, no, I was a bit of a dark mode fan, and I realized that like when it's daylight, I can't see things. So like my email client, which was in dark theme, I just couldn't read it on my laptop screen. I was like, I need to do something about this.
Yeah, and as you get older, and you sit at a computer for longer, you really should take the time to figure out ways to do it comfortably. Whether it's making your font bigger, using light mode instead of dark mode, buying a fancy keyboard, nice chair, like that's all worth it. Cool.
And our last question, which is not tech related, and you know exactly what I'm about to ask, is, are you a pineapple on pizza kind of person? How about banana on pizza?
I do like pineapple on pizza, but banana on pizza, I have never even thought about. That seems quite weird.
The fellows, they're a wild bunch.
I watched a lot of BA Test Kitchen, so pineapple on pizza with like a little bit of spicy like pepperoni or like a pepper or something would be quite good. Yeah. Although I did just make a bunch of pizzas and I did not seek out pineapple to put on it. So
controversial.
I did put Brussels sprouts on a couple of them though. So
wait, Brussels sprouts on a pizza?
Heck yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, let me blow your mind, all you anti-pineapple on pizza people. I had Brussels sprouts on one of them with like caramelized onions and pepperoni, and then I also had one that had broccoli on it because I had broccoli to eat. And
look at you being healthy.
Roasted veggies are good. Put them on a slab of dough. It's even better with some cheese.
There you go. Top tips from Scott himself. Cool.
Yeah, it's so valuable.
You've just changed everyone's lives.
It's not for one meal. I made 5 pizzas because I'm home alone right now, so I'm like eating for a week off 5 pizzas.
That's like the most programmer thing I've ever heard. I'm just eating pizzas.
I'm living my bachelor life while I have the opportunity.
I was actually talking to some of the full-time MLH staff about this, about some of the things I cook, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I keep forgetting you're a college student. Like that's definitely like the sort of thing a college student would eat." And I'm like, "What did you expect? Like I'm gonna cook like a 3-course meal? Like
yeah,
no baked beans on toast, like obviously pizza,
yeah,
quick food."
I did make the dough myself, so
extra points there, bonus points for doing it yourself.
It didn't turn out that well, but I did. But yeah,
someone asked 2 whole pizzas for 1 meal.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is that it's not for 1 meal; it's for a lot of meals.
How big are the pizzas, though?
They were like 12 inches, like maybe 6. I think 6 slices a piece. But like the dough recipe I have is just like a kilogram of flour. and then you just make a bunch of dough, and yeah, just like made them all. I'm totally down to eat cold pizza, so I'm getting lots done right now because I don't have to cook. Like, oh, I've got to eat lunch. I know what I'll have: cold pizza. And like I made them slightly different, so it's not like exactly the same thing for days in a row, but. Yeah.
Variety. There you go. So you've got it sorted. Your wife's going to come back and be like, "I left you alone for how long?"
Yeah, she makes better food than I do. So, yeah,
it all makes sense.
I would say I don't know if you're going to let me wrap up, but I was going to say if folks have more questions or want to reach out, I'm always happy to help. I am on the MLH Discord as I guess Scott on there. I'm Tan Newt basically everywhere, which is like randomly generated in 1999. So if you want to find me, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer more questions and give more guidance.
If anyone does any more questions, we've got a little bit of time that you can put them in the Zoom chat, or you should be able to unmute your microphone if I know how to use Zoom. Yeah, you can. So if you've got any more questions, feel free to. But again, I'm the kind of person who's like, oh no, I can't think of any questions. And then half an hour later, I'm like, oh, rubbish. I've got like 30 now.
I also make no promises on the quality of the guidance, so take it with a grain of salt. It's just from my experience.
Well, it's been really useful because we've been talking to a lot of people asking similar sort of questions. It's really interesting to hear their different perspectives on these sort of things.
Interesting, yeah. I'll have to figure out if I've got it all wrong.
The right way of doing it.
I mean, I'm pretty happy, so I guess that's the real metric. But
yeah,
then people keep
truth
paying
is, yeah, you know, if you're happy and you can pay the bills, then like, so that's a pretty good like starting point.
I think so, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the fun fact is there isn't really a right way, and I'm pretty sure Scott will agree. He has no idea what he's doing. He's just sort of making up as he goes along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like what you do now may make you happy now, but in a year it won't. Like that doesn't mean that you should keep doing it. You can do something else. And I should also plug that I do stream on Fridays at 2 p.m. Pacific.
In fact, I've been ready to put this in the Zoom chat.
Oh, in case you wanted to watch like 10 hours of me talking, you can watch the playlist.
What time do you stream on a Friday?
2 p.m. Pacific. So an hour from ago is when I would have started.
So for everyone in the UK, which is no one here, that's 10 p.m. For people in the East Coast, that is 5 p.m. I believe. Mm-hmm. So only a 3-hour difference between East Coast and West Coast.
Yep.
Oh, I thought it was a 4-hour difference, but it shows a whole British now, but I don't know these.
Yeah, no, it's only 3. And then it's 3 hours to Hawaii the other way.